Humans are amazing creatures. They have the capacity to sympathize and empathize so much. They place value on and emotionally connect to the simplest of things. They love so easily and plentifully. Characters act as targets, focal points to connect to and cherish. People feel their struggles and triumphs and place adoration on them. Humans can't help but personify and connect. This means that characters don't have to be human for them to be relatable and loved. It is not just the case that non-human characters can equally reflect the human experience. Sometimes, using non-human characters adds additional meaning and dimension to the messages that the creator is attempting to convey. Creators can use animals associated with archetypes to help justify their actions, or additionally, to add extra wildness and danger that the animal world is known for. Stories have also personified objects to make unique stories utilizing both the passive nature of objects observing the world as it goes by, and the possessive love people put into objects they own. And, relevant to the book discussed, is the way robots are used in stories. Robots are special because they are created as facsimiles, imitations of life. They have bodies and move, and some have the ability to think, at least a little. Robots force the question of what does it mean to be alive? And writers utilize this in their stories to explore not only life, but humanity as well. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. That is only part of what this video is about. We have discussed the characters themselves, but let's move on to artistic choices and design. Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics: The Invisible Art, connects the human tendency to recognize symbols and icons to the success of the artistic simplicities of characters. He states that simplifying the portrayal of characters allows one to amplify meaning. You pay more attention to the message being conveyed, the less distracting the messenger is. Simplicity also increases relatability through the use of creating a universal mirror. The more detailed and defined a character is visually, the less of yourself that you can see in them. That doesn't mean that characters and art styles geared toward realism are impossible to connect to. Humans aren't to be underestimated like that. However, it makes the process more streamlined. The time it takes to connect to a character is much faster when they are already easy to analyze at a glance. McCloud continues to explain that a chosen art style reflects what the artist places the most value upon: realism or meaning, or otherwise, the beauty of the natural real or the beauty of ideas. Now, think for a moment. What demographic has the highest concentration of abstract, simple art styles for media? Children. Children's media utilizes this simplicity because of what I've mentioned. The simpler the delivery of a message, the easier it is to absorb that message and connect to the delivery method itself. Children don't have the proper analytical experience to correctly look behind facades and obscured meanings all of the time. If the goal of children's media is to teach, whether that be life lessons or practical education, then it is necessary to make it clear. Simplicity of delivery, however, does not always equate to the simplicity of a message. Children's stories are able to perform a balancing act between realism and abstraction, and simplicity and complexity. Stories can tackle different messages, like coping with the loss of a loved one, forgiving those who have wronged you, or finding your identity. And characters for children's stories have their own complex motivations, struggles, and quirks. These characters are relatable because their simplicity lets one project their self onto the character, but they are also relatable because they seem real by how they feel how we feel, experience what we experience. Let's focus this back to robots. Robots are commonly related to the concept of the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is the feeling of unease when perceiving something artificial, but human-like, where the ratio of this combination is wrong. A robot that is designed to hide its own artificiality feels dangerous to us, thus uncanny. So, how are robots in children's media portrayed? Usually pretty simplified. Even the Transformers, robot characters that are incredibly humanoid, don't try too hard to pass as humans. It all coalesces into an ironic twist. Robots are mimics of life and are used as stand-ins to question life and humanity. However, the best way to convey this message is to simplify the robot's design so that the character is relatable while not being distracting. With all of this in mind, let's apply it to an example, a short analysis of what makes Peter Brown's The Wild Robot a successful conveyance of message using a robot main character in a children's book. The art style of the book's illustrations don't use lines, but rather rely heavily on texture and shape. Because of this, everything has an approachable quality to it. The main character, Roz, is made out of a few simple shapes, with the main upper torso making the most of her body. Her face is just 2 circles and a line, the most blank face one could make. She is the perfect blank canvas to work off of. But this does not mean that the illustrations convey no emotion or meaning. The book uses scale and spacing to create it. Roz is commonly set against a large open space of the wilderness, making her minuscule in comparison. She is small against a big world that will work against her. Even though she is a robot, by setting her up against the grand, powerful imagery of nature, the book reframes this as an underdog story. She is usually solitary in these wide pictures, reflecting her loneliness before making her animal friends. When the fierce winter comes, and many of the island animals die, Roz is shown small and alone in a wide space once again. In comparison, the Ricos are shown to be gigantic, dwarfing the forest surrounding them. Despite their blank faces, they are here to kidnap Roz, and readers should feel intimidated. It is only when the Ricos are getting bested by the animals that we see one Rico puny before the might of nature. One particular page spread uses this space to its advantage, especially the usage of negative space. When Roz sends her adoptive son, Brightbill, out onto the pond for the first swim, she can't follow deep enough to keep him safe, as the water would harm her. This is the first real moment that Roz has left Brightbill alone in someone else's care. The words across the space between them heightens this sense of nervous separation that Roz is experiencing. The readers feel a sense of unease once they read the final line next to Brightbill, how the mood of the pond suddenly shifts. Compare this to a smaller picture, where Roz gently holds her son to comfort him inside their cozy home called the nest. There's a feeling of safety and love. The pictures aren't just solid shapes, there's also texture as well. The speckles and splotches add to the chaotic wildness of the surroundings. Roz, in particular, is covered in splotches and smudges after deciding that cleaning herself isn't really worth it, and embraces life on the island. Meanwhile, the Ricos are much cleaner, having come from the outside. It subtly emphasizes how Roz fits into the home she has found, unlike the other robots. The book never lets you forget that Roz is a robot. The narrator reminds the reader consistently about it. This narrator, however, has both omniscience and unreliability. In the beginning, the narrator states that Roz has no emotions because she is a robot. The reader is meant to doubt this. Later, it often states that Roz feels something close to curiosity, to fear, to happiness. And near the end of the book, it drops the pretense entirely as Roz declares her love for her son and her appreciation toward all of her animal friends. At one point, Roz even tells Brightbill that she has instinct, like all of the other animals. Roz isn't simply cold and calculating. When conversing with the opossum, Pinktail, Roz learns about acting and realizes that acting alive and kind, or acting like a mother, is a survival technique. However, when does acting turn into something real? How much of Roz is an act when she wears a party dress of grass and leaves to the bonfire party? This isn't the only way that Roz is different from the usual robot. When Brightbill's flock sees the robots at the farm, there is time taken to create a parallel. One of the robots accidentally cuts her fingers off on a sawmill, and with precision, she calmly replaces her hand with a new one to the side. Roz, meanwhile, loses a foot in her fight with the bear siblings. After saving the younger brother bear from falling off the cliff, the animals work together to give her a wooden prosthetic foot. Roz's missing foot is treated like a serious injury. Injuries and their long-term effects are not particularly explored with robot characters, because robots can be fixed and don't feel pain. Roz can't just give herself a new foot like the other robots. She needs help, like a human would. Roz learns and receives help from all of the animals around her, and in turn, she teaches and helps the animals. The animals taught her language, camouflage, building, gardening, and childcare. She taught them how to use fire and built them lodges during the winter. The fire especially has interesting implications, since that is what originally separated humans from animals. In the end, the animals all worked together to protect her from the Ricos. This theme of learning from others continues right to the climax, as the birds use the laser rifle on the final Rico. Brightbill's flock took the experience of the farmer shooting some of their own and learned from it. To quote the book, "The hunter was confused. How had those animals gotten a rifle? And how could they possibly know how to fire it? They did know. The geese had seen a trigger pressed before." In the final chapter, the narrator says this to round out this theme of learning. Reader, it must seem impossible that our robot would have changed so much. Maybe the Ricos were right. Maybe Roz really was defective, and some glitch in her programming had caused her to accidentally become a wild robot. Or maybe Roz was designed to think and learn and change. She had simply done those things better than anyone could have imagined. To live is to adapt. Roz was designed to adapt and help others. Living within a community is a survival instinct, and all the skills that require such an action. Through Roz's life on the island, she helped support an animal community and became a key member. At first, she was called a monster and avoided by the animals, but they later accepted her and simply referred to her as a robot. She was no longer seen as other among the animals. As the book says, the island was teeming with life, and now it had a new kind of life, artificial life. Roz's kind of life is new, but it is still life, and reflects how we perceive it. One easy way to see this is through the parallels drawn between Roz and Brightbill. Both Roz and Brightbill were essentially orphaned through storms. When Roz first awakens, she is described to have burst from her crate, like hatching from an egg, not too unlike the egg she nurtures. They entered the world and only had each other. Both Roz and Brightbill were ostracized at first. Roz was considered a monster, but it is through adopting Brightbill that Roz can connect with the other animals. Brightbill is seen as different because his mother is a robot, but he later takes charge and becomes a leader of the geese flock, like how Roz became a leader of the island during winter. They both used what they learned to help others, and they needed the other to survive, whether one was alive or not. The Wild Robot is a simple story. It is a story about learning to live. However, because Roz is a robot, we can find many more topics to discuss about the subject. By showing how this outsider is able to become just another of the living creatures, it makes the reader think harder about what the message is saying. Everyone learns about life while they grow. The basic act of living makes this book relatable. The simple images do not distract from the message, they emphasize what is being conveyed. Other works have approached this topic of artificial life, but The Wild Robot is an excellent use of a robot character to analyze what it means to live.